There's a story in the Old Testament about a woman who's named Queen Esther. Esther got an uncle whose name is Mordecai. Mordecai finds himself in a very negative situation. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But Mordecai says to Esther, he said, "And who knows whether or not thou hast come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" The storyline is a little bit difficult, but what happens is they need a new queen, and they find Esther, a beautiful young lady. And Mordecai said, "Whatever you do, don't tell anybody that you're of Jewish descent." So she goes in, she becomes queen, she does all the queen things, and everybody loves the queen. There's a guy in the kingdom, he just doesn't like Mordecai at all because Mordecai refuses to bow. And so without getting all the details of the story, they determine that something bad's got to happen to Mordecai, and all the Jews, as a matter of fact. And so what nobody was aware was that Mordecai's family was the queen. And so in the middle of this story, Mordecai sends word to Esther, or Esther sends word to Mordecai about what's happening. And he says to her, "Who knows whether or not you've been placed in the kingdom for such a time as this?" You know, life is made up of those one-time opportunities, And in this story, Esther saves the entire nation of Israel by her actions. Sometimes it's hard to believe that God has placed us in such a time as this. God has placed us right here in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of this quarantine, in the middle of this virus. But according to the word of God, a person's footsteps are ordered of the Lord. Matter of fact, the Bible says a righteous person's footsteps are ordered of the Lord. You say, what's righteous? The Bible said God makes us righteous. So in our life right now, even though it appears that there's nothing ordered about it, even though it appears that it's absolute chaos, even though it appears that none of this is right, can you imagine what it was like to be Esther in the palace, being the queen? And God had placed her there. God had placed her there for such a time as that to save the entire nation of Israel. As a matter of fact, her uncle said deliverance will come one way or the other. But God placed you there for such a time. Listen, it may seem like what you're doing is not important. It may seem like it doesn't really matter. I read a story about John J. Adams, who was the president of the United States. And his son had just pushed him to take him fishing. And later in life, years later, we read the diary of John J. Adams, the President of the United States. And he said, "I wasted a day going fishing with my son." His son wrote in the diary as well, said, "The greatest day of my life was today. My dad took me fishing." Perspective, right? It's all about perspective. So the perspective that you're in right now may seem like it's a waste of your life. But who knows whether or not God has placed you there for such a time as this to save the life of your son or your daughter, or maybe your neighbor, who knows? But you must understand your footsteps ordered. God has this thing in his hand. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow.